The armed forces of Ukraine are entering Bryansk. Kremlin propagandists are sounding the alarm. An entire company of Russians is lost. The armed forces of Ukraine are breaking deeper into Kursk. NATO is attacking Russia. A conflict is starting in the Baltic Sea. It is burning and blazing. Drones of the armed forces of Ukraine have torn apart several crucial targets in Russia, which are truly shocking. All of this and more in our broadcast hotspot. At this moment, the armed forces of Ukraine are advancing further and will soon enter Bryansk. In Rostov, a real hysteria has begun over this. Meanwhile, as Bryansk trembles with fear, the armed forces of Ukraine have taken out an entire company of Russians in the Kursk region. Watch the report on what is currently happening on the front line and the losses the Russian armed forces are suffering.
The scale of the tragedy will last for years. The Kremlin is provoking an environmental disaster at sea. In the Russian port of Ust-Luga, the tanker Koala, which was carrying 130,000 tons of fuel oil, has broken down. The Finnish border guard has already dispatched a patrol plane to the Gulf of Finland due to the accident. And while the Kremlin is pondering what to do with the tankers, Russians are raising the alarm in the armed forces, entering Bryansk. This is how most news feeds of Russian media sound.
The Ukrainian armed forces are preparing a breakthrough into the Bryansk region. The underground reported coordinates. The pro-Russian underground has reported on the Ukrainian armed forces' preparations for a breakthrough into the Bryansk region.
The fact that the Russian Federation does not rule out such a scenario is evidenced by the accelerated pace of construction of engineering and fortification structures in both regions, on which a record $500 million have already been spent from the Russian budget, plus the creation of operational tactical groups, Briansk, Belgorod, a total strength of up to 90,000 personnel.
While Bryansk trembles with fear, the battles in the Kursk region continue. Ukrainian fighters have stopped a massive attack by the occupiers. Russian troops, along with North Korean soldiers, have once again launched an assault in the Kursk region. Overall, Russia lost at least a company of personnel in this unsuccessful assault.
It is worth noting the successful tactics of the Ukrainian Defense Forces in destroying Russian columns and columns of North Korean soldiers. At the time of the still ongoing deployment of units, it is precisely this tactic that allowed the Ukrainian Defense Forces to report the losses among Russian and North Korean military personnel.
Moreover, throughout the entire full-scale war, Russia has already lost over 850,000 of its military personnel killed and wounded. And yet, the Russians themselves are now afraid of their own army soldiers. Ukrainian intelligence intercepted another phone conversation of the Russians.
About the fact that they are shooting there, not at you. What did you do to them? And you, well, grab, Ike, it's loud. You can hear the grab. There I hear some impacts, something. You don't walk outside. Why don't you walk? There in some telegram, a soldier ran away. Only the leaders were also hit.
Recently, there has been a mass desertion from the ranks of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Moreover, the desertion with firearms. Accordingly, these gangs of marauders pose a serious threat, primarily to the civilian population. According to the Russian side, an interception plan has been implemented in the Kursk region at the moment. It concerns the escape of 3 former convict servicemen from the 104th Air Assault Regiment, 76th Air Assault Division.
But while Putin's soldiers are fleeing the war in some regions of Russia, it's getting very loud again. For example, explosions were heard in the Krasnodar region.
So it has started in Krasnodar. Everyone sit down, understand.
Run, 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 run. Drones likely attacked the Afipsky oil refinery. A fire broke out there. This is not the first and certainly not the last attack on Russia's oil refineries. According to experts, about 46% of Russian refineries have already been damaged or destroyed.
46% of Russia's oil refineries have been destroyed as of today. That's how you should buy a horse. 36%.
Well, 6 missiles and 6 drones hit Bryansk, targeting the silicon plant, which has been halted. 6 hit directly on the plant.
And overall, in 2024, drones have struck Russian refineries and fuel depots at least 81 times. And this is just the beginning.
Well, in the occupiers' army, it's complete madness. In Sukatkom, they drove through the enemy, breaking through their defenses. In 2 months, the Russians lost 100,000 people. The occupiers have never faced such losses before. About the enemy's massive losses and what awaits them on the front line. Watch.
The Russian army has been suffering huge losses in recent months, the highest in almost 3 years of full-scale invasion.
According to our calculations, the total losses amounted to over 434,000 personnel of the warehouse itself. Among them, there are approximately 150,000 of them are dead.
According to the latest report from the Institute for the Study of War, in just the past 2 months, the Russians have lost nearly 100,000 people.
The Russian troops have lost 48,240 people. More than 3 Russian motorized rifle divisions in January 2025, making January the second largest month of losses. Available data indicates that Russian troops lost 96 people per square kilometer of captured territory. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense reported that Russian troops lost 48,670 soldiers in December 2024. Their highest monthly loss rate since the start of the full-scale invasion.
According to the BBC, the largest percentage among the dead are newly mobilized volunteers.
Most notably, 23% of all the deceased we identified are volunteers. That is, those who signed a contract after the start of the full-scale invasion. We also include in this category those who signed a contract to avoid criminal punishment. Slightly fewer, 17%, of all known deceased are prisoners, already convicted individuals who went to the front from correctional colonies. Another 12% of the deceased were mobilized, and another 17% are career military personnel.
But the problem is not only in training, but also in the lack of military equipment.
Clear evidence of this is the assaults using still Soviet automotive industry products, that is, on passenger vehicles, buggies, motorcycles, quad bikes, but with a minimal amount of heavy armored vehicles.
And in the number of volunteers, to fill the gaps on the front, they are literally sending colleagues on crutches into assaults.
Either they were discharged from hospitals or did not complete enough treatment and rehabilitation. The so-called cripple battalion. This is quite remarkable. A novelty of the Russian army, indicating a severe shortage of personnel.
In light of this, it's impossible not to recall the smirk of the Russian Defense Minister Belousov during Putin's report on those killed at the front.
It is our duty to always remember our comrades who died defending the motherland and our people. To surround their families, their children with constant care. I have said many times, and I will say it again. Their children are our children. We must never forget this.
The Russian authorities deliberately intensified the meat assaults to achieve results before the new US president takes office.
They are trying to solve strategic tasks for themselves. This includes reaching the administrative borders of the Luhansk and Donetsk regions. Moreover, the intensification of the Russian offensive is precisely in November, December, and accordingly January. That is the period of the election race in the United States. Accordingly, already the anticipation of the inauguration of the newly elected president of the United States.
At the same time, experts are confident that the Russians will no longer be able to occupy Ukrainian territories at such a speed, as they have reached larger populated areas.
These are Chasiv Yar, Toretsk, and accordingly the Pokrovsk direction. These are urbanized areas with a very dense urban development and the presence of so-called industrial zones. Accordingly, fighting in urban environments is high-intensity combat, which leads to a high rate of personnel, loss.
And yes, the number of their losses can only increase unless the Russian authorities abandon their bloodthirsty ambitions in favor of common sense.
Androvtsev is back on the front line. The losses of the Russian Federation in the war are already so great that returning, even wounded and battered soldiers of Kim's army have to be sent back to the front. but there's hardly anyone to return. During the last assault, the Koreans were completely smashed. Watch the report for more details.
Thousands of North Korean military personnel have returned to active combat operations in the Kursk region after a short break. This was stated by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. According to South Korean sources, Russia temporarily withdrew North Korean troops from the battlefield in mid-January 2025, possibly for rest or to reconsider their deployment. The Ukrainian Armed Forces have already repelled a joint assault by Russian occupiers and North Korean soldiers in the Kursk region.
The attacks were carried out by a large number of infantry groups in several directions at once. They advanced through fields and open areas. Enemy assault troops were also transported in buggies and unloaded in narrow groves where they hid under the trees. The enemy was powerfully suppressed by Bradleys and artillery using cluster munitions under the guidance of the reconnaissance company. Russian losses in this assault amounted to at least a company of manpower, the 47th Separate Mechanized Brigade, Magura, and on Telegram.
At the end of January, the New York Times reported that North Korean soldiers had not been seen in the Kursk region for about 2 weeks. Later, South Korean intelligence confirmed the withdrawal of DPRK military from their positions. At the same time, the head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Kirilo Budanov, stated that North Korean troops are still engaged in battles on the front line in the Kursk region, although their activity has decreased due to losses.
The Russian Federation is once again using DPRK troops as assault forces, effectively as expendable material. I would like to remind you there were documents, parliamentary records, confirmed the use of DPRK military personnel as so-called penal battalions, essentially a tactic from World War II.
Cooperation between the Kremlin and Pyongyang continues within the framework of the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Agreement. Despite the colossal losses of his military in the Kursk region, Kim Jong-un stated that he will continue to support Putin's dictatorial regime. He also threatens to increase the DPRK's nuclear capabilities to counter the military cooperation of the US with South Korea and Japan, reports Reuters. In exchange for military support, Russia may provide North Korea with drone and missile technologies.
It is expected that this year North Korea will begin the production of drones, which will be developed jointly with Russia. Several sources familiar with Russian-North Korean relations told NHK that the two countries have reached an agreement under which North Korea receives technical assistance from Russia in developing several types of drones for mass production. From a report on the website of the Japanese public broadcaster NHK, World Japan.
In addition to the military contingent, North Korea also provides Russia with labor. According to South Korean intelligence, last year North Korea sent thousands of its citizens for construction work across the Federation to replace the labor shortage caused by the mass exodus, the outflow of migrants following the start of Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine. And this is a violation of the UN Security Council resolution, which was in response to North Korea's weapons tests. Pyongyang was prohibited from sending its citizens to work abroad.
This has never happened before. NATO hit the Russians hard. In the Baltic Sea, a cable is damaged again, but this time it's the Russians themselves. A new war or just karma for the Kremlin? Watch in the report.
Is it really karma? Or a deliberate provocation? The Russian gas company Rostelecom announced on Saturday that some time ago its underwater cable in the Baltic Sea was damaged. It is reported that this occurred as a result of external impact. What is meant by this is not specified.
In the last 3 months, as a result of external interference, it has been repeatedly 4 telecommunications cables, which connected the Baltic countries and accordingly the pipelines. In other words, it was stated that according to the Finnish side, these mechanical damages are not accidental. Moreover, the Finnish side is considering the possibility of cable damage by the Russian Federation and China.
Earlier on Saturday, the Finnish Coast Guard reported that a Russian vessel is repairing a severed cable in the Gulf of Finland. And presumably this could take a week under good weather conditions.
According to the Finnish side, the duration of the repair work will directly depend on the weather conditions. Currently, there are severe weather conditions in the Baltic Sea, so accordingly, the work may extend beyond 1 week.
But here's the problem. A representative of the Coast Guard informed Finnish media that 2 telecommunications cables between St. Petersburg and Kaliningrad were damaged. However, in the Rostelecom report, only one is mentioned.
At the moment, it is known that 2 Rostelecom cables are damaged, not one. One of them, named Baltica, is over 1,000 kilometers long. And more than a third of this cable runs precisely through the own waters of Finland's exclusive economic zone.
But did such a serious incident affect the subscribers in Russia themselves?
According to the Russian side, the alleged mechanical damages that led to these works in the exclusive territorial waters of Finland did not directly affect the subscribers. But again, there is not the slightest reason to trust the Russian side.
It's also amusing that the malfunction of the Rostelecom cable was reported by the ministry as early as December 27th, yet the work only began on February 8th. What was stopping them?
The whole topic is about a complex nature. That is, the Russian Federation did not want to release information into the public domain. Secondly, these were accordingly severe weather conditions in the Baltic Sea, which did not allow for such repair work to be carried out.
But here's what's interesting. Earlier, on December 25th, a cable between Finland and Estonia broke in the Gulf of Finland, along with 4 other telecommunications cables. And strangely enough, these cables are located near Rostelecom.
The situation with the damage to the Russian cable should be considered as a possible provocation by the Russian side itself, which would allow, against the backdrop of this information, to increase the military presence of the Russian Federation in the Baltic Sea under the pretext of protecting telecommunications cables and accordingly the vessel, the so-called Shadow Fleet.
Let us recall that when the underwater communication cables between Finland and Estonia were damaged, a vessel was detained, Eagle S, from the Shadow Fleet of tankers of the Russian Federation. According to the investigation, the ship's crew planned to damage another energy cable, as well as a gas pipeline. In particular, before this incident, 2 more data transmission cables between Finland and Germany were severed.
That's all for now. For more fiery news from the front, watch the next episode.